So welcome everybody to this Nanotechnology Industries Association webinar, part of our Nano in Business series, and this time we're looking at serving nanotechnology, which is a really interesting topic to focus on, and hopefully there will be a lot of information shared today during the webinar. So I'm going to quickly introduce everybody that's involved today. My name is Claire Scantleberry, the Director General of the Nanotech Industries Association, and our two speakers for this webinar are Neville Slack from the Centre for Process Innovation and Kai Paul from Blue Frog Scientific. And what we will do within this webinar is there is a public session and a closed session for members. So we will run through the public session first, and then we will kick out all of the non-members and stick with members for a short Q&A at the end of that. We are recording this webinar and we will share the recorded version on YouTube with everybody, and we will keep people on mute to keep the audio quality okay, if that's all right with everybody else. So, as many of you know, and I see a lot of familiar names that come to our other webinars, the Nanotechnology Industry Association has the mission to support innovations through to market worldwide that are both develop economic and consumer products whilst being safe and with minimal impact on the environment. We work in three main areas, primarily for the regulatory ecosystem to help make it as functional as possible in which companies can develop materials. We work with our members for a lot of scientific and business networking and promotion. And finally, we work with organisations such as the European Commission through the framework programmes to help build a global ecosystem in which research and commercial activities take place. Our membership is pretty broad because, of course, we reflect the diversity of nanomaterials and nanotechnologies. And we range from large companies such as 3M and Solvay through a lot of small to mid-sized companies which are really looking at novel materials production and going into very versatile sectors. And we are supported by a fantastic layer of members from the sort of research area, from universities such as the University of Birmingham through to those non-profit research centres such as CPI and IMEC, who really are the interface between research and industry a lot of the time. And as you would expect, having a webinar looking at the service of nanotechnology, we have also a really strong layer of service provider members who work both on technical and business levels. Finally, we have our associations which operate at national level, who really help us to amplify support into small companies across countries, but primarily in Europe, but also worldwide. So what do we do? As a quick look into our activities in more detail, our primary activity is around regulatory support, particularly around the new nano-specific language that's emerging within different legislation such as REACH, so that we help our members understand very much how they need to be prepared, how the regulatory landscape is likely to lie for their different products that they're developing. And we also work with the regulatory agencies and national and international authorities to help ensure that systems are aligned in terms of language as much as possible. They are as legally precise as possible, so that a pathway of certainty can be laid before companies for materials development. And in a very uncertain world that we live in today, a very concrete pathway for materials development is an incredibly important part of confidence and investment. On our business and scientific networking side of the association, we have really great members with a huge variety of skills and applications, so we draw on them all the time as part of our business and scientific networking. So we run a Nanotech Innovation Council where we monitor the latest disruptive technologies that support industrial development. We work with other industrial associations into different sectors to bring the sectoral expertise that we can match our nano expertise to. We run a funding tracker where we look at the sources of funding available for our members, and that can be both public and private investment. On the promotional and networking side of things, we're very excited to have this year our first Nano Pavilion, which is a large exhibition stand which we will take around to different shows with our members to really showcase what nanotechnology does and who are the players in it. And our first stop on the roadshow this year will be Chemspec in Basel, and we'll be delighted for people to visit Chemspec and visit the Nano Pavilion there and meet 8 of our members showcased within the pavilion. We're also part of a Brussels-based Industry for Europe coalition, which is over 140 different industry associations working together to support the development of a European Union industrial strategy, which is going to be much more focused on the commercial outcomes from the activities that the EU supports so well. And finally, we're very much involved in a lot of the collaborative projects that go on within Europe in particular, looking at all aspects of nanomaterials production. So not just the scientific side and the commercial side, but also the regulatory and the governance side. So it's our way of helping to build an industry-ready framework in which it may operate. And of course, no webinar would be complete without my usual call to say, if you're not a member of NIA yet, why not? It's open to all types of different organisations, and our members are very active. So you can contact me at any point to follow up on membership applications, and we look forward to seeing you in future activities. So that's our contact details, and that takes us back to the show. So I'm going to give a very short introduction to services, the importance of services within the successful development of a nanotechnology sector. And this is something that I've worked on personally over a number of years. As before I worked in Nano, I worked within the biotechnology sector, and I was very lucky to watch that sector grow very quickly through a boom in private and public investment into bio-based products and technologies. And it was very interesting to watch the economic development of that sector, not just the products that came out of it, but the infrastructure that enabled that sector to really become economically mature. And it's very interesting to apply that now into nanomaterials and technologies and look at where the similarities and differences are, because nano is much younger as a defined sector than biotechnology, and it's still earlier in the economic development pathway. So at the top of this slide, you will see you have the primary activities, which are the production of nanomaterials themselves and the production of nano-enabled products. And those are the core at the centre of this sector. However, they are served by a huge number of different skills that I've just thrown a few into this slide that you can see. And I've probably missed a lot of things off here that people in this webinar would be able to supply as well. And this was very much how we viewed it within the biotech sector as well, in that the core product production was the focus for a huge number of service companies, and whether those were entirely new service sectors that developed in response to biotechnology, or they were adaptations of existing services, such as, we take legal as the first example, and you could measure the relative success of areas within biotechnology by looking at, for example, the dedicated specialist biotechnology teams growing within law firms, for example, same within IP firms. And all of the activities that serve sectors across the world were focused towards the development of biotechnology. And now we see them looking also at nanotechnology and working out how to expand their services to represent the unique aspects of nanomaterials production. Because, of course, we forget that nanomaterials are simply an extension in the range of chemistry. So there's a lot of chemistry service providers that are incredibly active, however, are not looking at nano-specific or nano-unique aspects yet, because there are increasing requirements that are nano-specific coming through. So let's look at the importance of services. And you see very much, and this is something we saw very much with the expansion of the biotech sector, in that primary production is becoming a smaller part of the sector as a whole. When companies were first set up, they would try to do everything. They would have the core biotechnology skill. They would then try and develop the manufacturing side of it, the trial side, the testing side. You saw companies grow quite large quite quickly, But then it was not an economically viable model to actually bring a product to the market. It was too expensive, it was too slow, and you saw the mission of companies stretched too far. And so many companies failed early on in the biotech sector because they grew too quickly and too large away from their core mission. And in response to that, we saw a lot of small, fast-moving, high-skilled service providers come into existence, most of whom were in the private sector. And this was very broad. It was right through business services through to technology services. And that's something that you see all over in all sectors now. Everything is very fragmented in terms of where you go and get skills. And of course, that's very interesting because it builds up very specialised, high capability that can move quite quickly, and a company that needs their services doesn't have to expand its own skill or employee base. It can buy it in when it needs it to. So you see within sectors as a whole, the service sector is actually a very high percentage of that technology. So within biotechnology, for example, when we were growing mature biotechnology clusters, services were up to 50% of the operating capacity of that particular cluster. And so that is something that reflects the commercial maturity of the core technologies, because more businesses will follow where there is money to be made. And the use and development of a competitive service sector improves the competitive position of a sector and a country or a region as a whole, because the faster and cheaper you can get a product to market, the more markets you can reach and the quicker you will get there. So it's very much about enabling an increase in productivity, because that will definitely increase your sales capacity. And services themselves are an economic resource for a country. So it's something that can be exported. A country that has a significant services sector will sell those services as much as possible, and they will rapidly build a critical mass of capability. And that's a huge source of economic income, and also significantly boosts production of those particular sectors as well. And when we look at nanotechnology, it's a very young commercial sector. The word nano is a relatively recent one when applied to chemistry and chemicals, but it's still got a significant amount of publicly funded activities to try and build up the commercial delivery from nanomaterials and nanotechnologies. And service investment is a really good indicator of how economically mature a sector is, because it takes a lot of money to set up and invest in a new service provision. So you're only going to do it where you think there will be enough money to be made. And as we see nano changing, particularly from a regulatory side and a legal side, that is something that service providers must get past before they can justify investment. So as we see right now with the requirement for the recognition of nanoforms within your REACH dossiers, at the moment I think we are in the mid-30s in terms of dossiers that specifically name that they have a nanoform within them. That is expected to increase, but that is what service providers, particularly such as large CROs, will be looking at before they decide to invest in the quite significant costs associated with nano-specific services. So when there is greater certainty around the new nanomaterials definition, the role and the restrictions of regulations that are more nano-specific, we will see responses from the service sector. I could pretty much talk about this all day, but I will stop, and I will hand over now to our first presenter from the Centre for Process Innovation, who is Neville. And while I hand over the slides for Neville, he can introduce himself and say hello. I will just make sure I haven't. Oh yeah, I will unmute Neville so you can say hello, and I'll get your slides up, Neville. But that is a general introduction to why services are so important. And so when you look at all aspects of development of nano, you have to understand where commercial service provision is starting to mature and support the sector as a whole. But Neville, take it away, and I will find your slides right now.
Thank you very much, Claire. A fantastic introduction there to the topic. Welcome, everyone. My name obviously is Noah Slack. I'm the Business Development Manager at CPI, and as the presentation progresses, you'll see the different facets of CPI. So I'm actually a Business Development Manager within the National Formulation Centre. I've been at CPI just over 11 years, and I've held various roles within the company. Next slide. The objectives I want to go through in this presentation is I'll give you an introduction to CPI and our mission. There's the four areas I want to basically touch on, not too deeply, is services that we provide within nanotechnology, where we see the greatest industry demand, our impacts within the nanomaterial producers and the end users, and with that I think about 5 examples of some of the projects that we've gone through. We work with some companies, although there are many more, some obviously confidential and some haven't been written up yet. And then finally, where we see the future of services to the nanotechnology industry. Next slide. So, for those who don't know CPI, we're an independent technology and innovation centre. We're based up in the northeast of England, and also we soon to be crossing the border into Scotland, where we're working with the University of Strathclyde for a manufacturing innovation centre. Next slide. What we do is we used to use the word technology and readiness level, but some people understand that and a lot of people don't understand that. So basically we enable ideas, research and knowledge, and hopefully help the company translate those into a commercial business. In essence, we're sitting in that middle bubble there, which is the innovation area. So we're there initially to cross this so-called valley of death, which is things that companies are trying to evolve a product or a process with the hope of becoming commercial, where they lack technical knowledge and predominantly assets in terms of equipment. That's where we sit, and that's the sweet spot that we sit. Next slide. And then so basically we're there to hopefully reduce risk, demonstrate that they're trying to refine novel technologies. Sometimes it's a matter of we're trying to scale up the product or the process, and more importantly, if we can, is decrease the time to market, because obviously it's time critical sometimes, but also first to market is always a positive. Next slide. I appreciate this is a little bit of a busy slide, but it gives us an idea. CPI are one of the members of the UK's High Value Manufacturing Catapult Centre. Now, the government, for those who don't know, the government set up these catapult centres. The High Value Manufacturing one has just had its fifth year in existence, so we're on about 6. So it's about 6 years old for the first catapult. And these were set up on the basis of trying to create innovation within the UK to sort of mimic those innovation centres that were set up in the likes of Germany with the Fraunhofers, in Finland, VTT, etc. So this is the government's way of trying to do that. So ultimately, the bubble on the left is the government. Obviously, the catapult, which at the moment there's quite a number. Like I say, some of them are very new, some a year old, some 2, some 3, etc. And each one focuses on a particular area of growth, which we think, or the UK thinks, has got growth potential. So if we follow the line across, we hit the High Value Manufacturing Catapult is where CPI sits. So within that, we have another six partners. They're spread throughout the UK. Some AMRC, NAMRC in Sheffield, AFRC is up in Scotland, Warwick Manufacturing Group is obviously, the National Competence Centre is in Bristol. So everyone does their own specialty work, but we'll collaborate much more on joint projects. So, for example, the AMRC and the NMRC, they're mainly involved with the metal services. So they have a cluster-based model situation where they have tier organisations where Rolls-Royce and Boeing, BAE Systems are part of that. CPI itself doesn't have any membership model. We tend to work with any small, large company, academia. We do an awful lot of work with SMEs. Initially in the UK, because CPI was set up before the catapult centres, we were set up as part of the regional development agencies that the UK had. So we were focused primarily at that time with companies in the northeast of England. But now, obviously, with the catapults, we spread countrywide and then also within overseas markets, Europe. We still are part of Europe, so we sort of quite open with that. Next slide. So within CPI, as I say, we sort of are all northeast based. So we have at the moment four national centres. The first one was the National Industrial Biotech Facility. The picture itself there looks quite grand. That's not all us. We're part of that. That's the old ICI European headquarters at Wilton near Redcar. So we're actually in there. We're not all of it. The next one is the National Print Electronics Centre, which we do own. And the third one is the National Biologics Manufacturing Centre, which is based in Darlington. If you come up to Darlington Railway Station, it's just across the road, and they look at the next generation of pharmaceuticals, working with the large pharmaceutical companies. The part of the business, the National Formulation Centre, is where I work, and that's in Sedgefield, on a place called Net Park, where the National Print and Electronics Centre is also based. So we have two of those centres right next door to each other, and there's a close reason for that, because what we produce in terms of formulated products can also go into print electronics. So there's a lot of collaboration work with that, and that's why I've put that caveat at the bottom there, which says, although we're one CPI, we may have many centres, but we operate as one CPI. And we support each other on a regular basis, in fact, all the time. But specifically on certain projects, we have many different business units working in the same project. Next slide. So getting specifically within the formulation, which is where certainly within CPI, the nanomaterial sits. We have an integrated capability within the area. The two pictures on the left, which is a Centre for Innovative Formulation, that was set up. Again, that's a bird's eye view of many of the buildings on what I just said is Net Park. So we're not all of that. We are part of it, and that was set up primarily to focus on the formulation area of the northeast, and I'll go into how we do that in a following slide. The middle one is the National Formulation Centre, which was set up some 3 years ago-ish. A building was built, which is what I'm sat in, and that was opened just over a year and a half ago. So we have all our technical and business resources for formulation in one place. And that basically was set up by the government to look at via the canvas of big formulation companies to look at formulation within the UK. So within that, we work strongly with a lot of the big formulation companies to look at more strategic type projects which benefit the UK or Europe generally. We also have the Graphene Application Innovation Centre, which is part of the National Formulation Centre, and that's obviously, the name says it all. Within that, we work reasonably closely as well with the Manchester Innovation Centre, but our main focus there is looking at the application side. So we work with a lot of companies working with graphene, but specifically on the application side and developing products. And the next one. This one's a little bit busy, and I'm not going to go too much into it, but just gives you a broad view of our technical capabilities. There's a lot of nano capabilities there, but we also cover, because we're formulation, we look at solids and look at liquids. There's a crossover there, and underpinning a lot of this is we have some very good high throughput experimentation and characterization, where we can look at quickly look at many different materials through the high throughput capabilities that we've got. Next one. So services that we provide within nanotechnology, there are many. I've picked on the 5 there. So as Claire alluded to, is the obviously the regulation, and part of that regulation is obviously the handling of nanopowders. So we have facilities to be able to handle that. We have glove boxes, etc., with the and also the necessary handling facilities that go with that. And then we have the capability of the staff who've handled these type of materials for quite a number of years. We have a comprehensive range of dispersion techniques to mix materials into liquids, etc., at various scales. We can actually functionalize graphene, which basically means we can put functional groups onto the edges of graphene, so that it gives it a bit more capabilities to go into things like composites. We've got nanostructuring. We can create nanostructures, incorporate into coatings and polymers, which is part of which was probably sometimes a forerunner for functionalization, and importantly, characterization. We've got quite a range of techniques within characterization, and I've just highlighted a few there, Raman obviously, and SEM to look at morphology, but we have many others, HPLC, thermal gravimetric analysis, etc., etc. So that's basically CPI generally. So the next slides are the 4 topics that I wanted to talk. So the first one is where we see the greatest industry demand. Now, I could probably ask various people in CPI, certainly formulation, and get there's many different answers. But first of all, I think it's a difficult question to answer because it all depends on requirements of the material, whether you want it in greater volumes, looking at the consistency of the batches, because what manufacturers who are using this material want its consistency, and having a batch-to-batch big variation doesn't really help. What are the benefits and what are the values? And at CPI, we've got a little bit of an obscured view within the nanomaterial industry, because we rely on the sort of market pull. So we rely on customers coming to us with their applications. We don't necessarily serve the market, although that we've recently set up a strategic marketing department, which I guess is partly trying to address this in terms of the wider aspects of nanomaterials. But that said, there's obvious. We see obvious examples like property enhancement through like mechanical properties, reinforcing and exhibiting of cracks in polymeric materials, scratch resistance in coatings, importance of electrical properties, transparent conductivities for solar cells, conductivity, lubricants. We have a number of European projects which have a number of end users, and the recent European H 2020 project has 4 partners in, and ironically one of those is Swarovski, which is the crystal people. So again, they're looking at using materials that go into printable electronics, which in essence are the inks and adhesives that we are developing to go into those areas, the market areas. Next question, next slide. please. So what impact do we think we make on the nanomaterial producers and supporting their success? Well, again, we were set up by the government in the high value manufacturing category, so we can support them by the membership of that. So we get a certain amount of funding from the from this area to look at markets and products. This tends to be more strategic in the nature for the UK, but even so, if there's enough interest there, then yeah, absolutely. A lot of it is via a lot of our work is via funded projects. So we have and continue to do a lot of Innovate UK type projects. As I've said, we're still part of Europe, so I personally coordinate in the Horizon 2020 project, which finishes end of this year, and we've just one's just started as us as a partner. We started in January this year, and it's a 4-year project. So we're still looking to participate in these with companies that we want to bring along with us, etc., and support it. The Innovate is obviously a UK funding body, so we work with companies within the UK. Obviously, and of course, with the European projects, we work with projects with European partners. ERDF projects, again, we have a number of those. We've had a number of those, and we continue to have those. They're regional specific, so ironically, certainly we're in the northeast where we are. We have 2 graphene manufacturers in the region, which is quite unique. But also we have a lot of companies who have some sort of formulation, which includes nanomaterials, which involves graphene, which involves other types of 2D material, which they're trying to develop. Some of them are very small. Some of them have already got products out in the market, and they just want to move into another market. So it's quite, it's very, very varied. And we, as part of the ERDF fund, we can support them on a little piece of work initially, and then we can build up to a bigger piece of work, and that's funded by the ERDF. We're paid by the region's local enterprise partnerships as they are now, and it just comes off the company's de minimis and GBA allowances that everybody gets to use. And the final one is a straightforward commercial work. CPI is a non-for-profit organisation. That doesn't mean that we can't do commercially paid work. We do have a commercial arm to CPI, which allows us to do that. Saying that, we don't have any shareholders, so therefore we have no dividends to pay out. So any money that comes in from commercial work goes straight back into the company, so that we can either fund more staff or update the equipment, because as you can imagine, some of our assets, as they get older and become slightly obsolete, need to be replaced, just to keep ahead of the game, basically. Next slide, please. So in terms of access to finance, we operate on various levels. So the regional one is obviously the RDF type projects. There's other regional type projects which are available on a sort of reasonably regular basis. Has been, not so much now. National will obviously with Innovate UK. Excuse me, another type of UK projects, and then international is obviously mainly the Horizon 2020, and of course private is commercial work. So there's the sort of main things, access to finance. What I want to do now is just to give you a few, quickly, 4 or 5 one-sliders on some of the projects that we work with. These are by no means represent any particular areas or whatever. It's just some of them. These are some of the slides that we've produced, which we've been using in other presentations that we do for various events, etc. Just gives people an idea of the sort of things we do. This is one that I coordinated. It finished 3 years ago, and this was basically taking food waste through an anaerobic digester to get the biogas, purifying the biogas, and through a microwave plasma reactor producing graphene carbon, which we did a lot of test work on. That was an FP7 project, and that is a project which I'm now trying to take forward into more of a business, because obviously it fits the circular economy, and the material that produced out of the project was very good. So that's one that we've done. Next one. This was a project we did via through the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, which is a study of looking at the barriers to graphene deployment in the marketplace. So this is one that which was carried out, I say, as part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult to look at the graphene market. Next one. Nano medicine manufacturing. I picked on this one basically just to show that it's the gambits, the breach of areas that Nano can get involved with is quite wide. So we work with an organisation called N for Pharma, looking at the transfer and scale of quantities for manufacture of them nanoparticles. So that's some work we've been doing with them, and we continue to work with that company. But I just basically put that on there just to give people an idea that it's not just the graphene, it's not just solids and the composites, it's also into the medicine side as well. And again, this was an Innovate UK project, again, which is one I was involved with, and this was looking at using nanomaterials within the machining of tools when using drills, etc. So obviously using water to cool off the tips of drills, etc. They obviously get hot, and over a course of time become blunt and have to be changed, etc. And by using nanofluids, creating nanofluids gives the opportunity to increase productivity by enabling the using additives for metal working fluids. So that was with a number of our high value manufacturing partners. So we had Warwick Manufacturing Group there, AMRC and NMRC, and on the steering group I think we had BE Systems, and an SME in the UK, Afton Chemicals, was involved with that. Out of this project, as it says in the results, that we've actually filed a patent that was using hexanoboronitride, and it's mainly in thermal management, so cooling computers, etc. So we're looking at trying to take that technology and moving it beyond what this project was all about, but in essence it was 2D material that we're using for this. Next one. And I just put this one in there because I did mention it previously that we had high throughput experimentation. This is a great tool to have, and I think we're in the process of purchasing another one. And this gives us the ability to look at the automation and the flexibility of handling of like a wide range of materials, offline and online. So we can set the instrument up, the robotics up to screen materials that would be done in a conventional lab, which would take personnel and time, and then set it off and leave it overnight, and then come next morning and the test results were there. So just basically gives us the opportunity to get through a lot of test subjects to sort of drill down on the design of experiments, etc. So they're some of the examples that I wanted to just to give you a taster of some of the things that we get involved with. There are many more, and they say each of the part of CPI involves in their own particular area in terms of industrial biotechnology and biologics. I say we do work closely with print electronics, because we have a number of projects where we're using the likes of developing of inks and adhesives, conductive inks and adhesives to feed into the print electronics side of our business. So there's a lot of working together. The final thing I want to talk about is get an idea where we see the future of services to nanotechnology. And the first one I get there, I think it's the most important one, and again, it's one that Claire alluded to, is the development of standards and regulations, which seems to be looked at on a daily basis, again, within the nano sector. And this could lead to the need for support in terms of the testing and validation by service providers to the nanotechnology industry sector. But it's important to this, with these regulations, it comes the affordability of characterization. As we all know, characterization and analysis is quite an expensive exercise, so we need to make sure that you don't price your services out of the market and that. The other one is it's the development, and it's already started, and this is probably no surprise to a lot of people. It's the development in many varied markets. I'm obviously, what I mentioned was formulation electronics because of the National Formulation Centre and from electronics facilities, so the linkage is there. But let's say other types of manufacturing, medical space, etc., and many more where these can fit. But one of the biggest challenges is the ability to make materials reproducible. I think I've got that wrong. And I think I mentioned that earlier. Variations can have a big impact on the overall performance and properties, and sometimes it's not feasible or not possible for companies who produce it on a batch-to-batch basis to get an exact match from batch to batch. Therefore, services is important to try and mitigate any sort of vast errors, and also to flag up with manufacturers that there's an issue there. And then the final slide is just to say these are some sort of technology and capabilities that we have within CPI and some of the areas that we're working in, some probably more than others. So therapeutic biologics, formulation, obviously, graphene within formulation, nanotechnology, photonics. We have a photonics centre which is now part of CPI, which is attached to CPI formulation, which is looking at using light in medical applications, but also looking at these sort of handheld devices. So a lot of companies are developing these devices that monitor people's health. So put a bit of blood on a slide that goes into a small device that gives you what your cholesterol level is, that type of thing. Electronic systems and sensors, which is growing as we move more into RFID and NFC capabilities, and obviously digital and data, which is the industry 4.0, etc. So that's it from me. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thanks very much indeed, Neville. And that was really interesting because CPI is obviously, as you can tell from the presentation, it's partly public funded. And that's something we see across Europe a lot, where you've got expensive infrastructure involved, because it's extremely difficult to invest in a site like you see within CPI from purely commercial grounds. And the question would have to be asked whether types of services, particularly earlier in the innovation stage, will ever be fully commercially viable, or whether they will always be used by public agencies to support company startups, because particularly as they're looking at early stage product development and validation, and where there is essentially no value yet within that product because it doesn't have market access and it hasn't reached proof of concept or proof of scale up, which would need to be done before it was perceived to be valuable by any downstream partners. So, but it's very interesting also to say, as Neville said at the end, it's like where market requirements dictate you require something, that is where commercial services will start to develop more. So hence the regulatory side of things. But it's a very interesting overview of how services have brought together a huge number of skills in what is a large organisation such as CPI. So I'd like to say thanks very much indeed, Neville. I'm going to switch you off now and switch on Kai instead. And for our next presentation, we are going to turn away from technology service provision and into much more sort of business expertise. So, Kai, I will allow you to introduce yourself while my computer very slowly, oh no, that's the wrong thing, very slowly gets going on your presentation. So take it away, Kai.
Great, thanks for that, Claire. So I'm Kai from Blue Frog Scientific. It's quite interesting what Claire was saying at the beginning, that the expansion of service provision shows health within an industry. Now, I started with Blue Frog Scientific 4 years ago, and along with many of my other roles, it was to build our nanotechnology or nanomaterial capabilities and activities within this area. And since then, that's what I've been trying to do. So this slide is really going to go through who we are, what we do, how we do it, some of the challenges within Nano, and why people will come to us as well. So Blue Frog Scientific is a scientific and regulatory affairs consultancy. Next slide, please, Claire. And it was formed from a company buyout in 2010 from the BMT group. It was 2 people at that time, and we've grown substantially since then. So the scientific consultancy side of things, you can see what we do on this slide: testing, design, intelligent or integrated testing strategies, ecotoxicity and environmental fate, toxicology and preparation of dossiers and expert reports. Our regulatory affairs services, they're quite broad. We cover agrochemicals, biocides, chemicals, so that's REACH, human pharmaceuticals, veterinary medicines, and consumer products. We also deal with project management and product defenses, during evaluations. We serve as an only representative, which I'll talk more on later, and also as consortium and task force management. Next slide. So we are based in the UK. Our main headquarters are in Edinburgh. We also have offices in Swansea, Cardiff, and Manchester. We also have an EU-based subsidiary company in Dublin. That is in the event of any kind of Brexit when it eventually happens. So we can still function within the EU if that's a preference, and also that's for our only representative services, which must remain within the EU. For us to be an only representative to get you market access into the EU if you're not within the EU but would like to import. And also it gives us the strength because we're also in the UK, should a similar thing happen in the UK where you need market access through an only representative with a UK base. We are currently 15 core staff, but we are supported by an associates network. And our biggest asset is our staff. They've been the key to the success of the company. Like I say, we started with 2 people. Since I started, we've doubled in size, and we like to keep them well trained and up with the current affairs of regulation and science in their chosen area. We serve a global client base for maintaining and achieving compliance with European chemical control legislations, and we've also now formed a partnership in the Asian Pacific regions with another consultancy, so we're able to aid people with technical advice and regulatory advice in the Asia Pacific regulations. We've got a very simple philosophy. It's achieving regulatory compliance through the application of good science, innovative thinking, and clarity, ensuring that all submissions are prepared efficiently and to a high standard. So next slide, please. So if we look at each regulation, just a very quick overview of some of the things we've done since the inception of the company 8 years ago. We've worked with varying oil field chemicals and products, disinfectants and detergents, UVCVs, which actually have many of the same challenges of uncertainty that Nano do. We've done hundreds of chemical safety assessments, lead registrations, etc. We've been an advisor for the UK Ministry of Defence and the European Defence Network. We provide only representative services, which, like I say, if you are an American company and you would like a European base so that you can import your product and directly sell it from yourself, then you would have to register through an only representative, where we act as the registrant for ECHA. And now with Brexit, we would help with Brexit navigation. So looking at legal entity transfers, if you've got an EU legal entity, one option is to transfer your legal entity from your UK to your EU site, along with OR services for the UK and for the EU, and keeping up with any advancements in the British chemicals legislation when and if that comes into inception. One of the main talking points now is, if that is the case, that some of your REACH registrations may be grandfathered in initially, and then you'll have a two-year or more process where you can meet the requirements of the British chemicals regulation. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to mention, we also manage consortia, fairly large consortia, whether supply data storage management solutions, accounting. You know, we've been part of an EU-funded project investigating new methods for plastics and recycling, and part of this consortium is management of money, and we manage over 20 million euros turnover for these companies and consortia. Next slide. We've started to move into biocidal products as well, and there are a few different registrations that we've done for that. Next slide, please. So we also deal with veterinary medicine and human medicines, and there's just a few examples of some of the products that we've done environmental risk assessments for on either side of those. As you can see, it's quite broad. And so next. Protection products, we've done 34 active ingredients, which actually covers 98 different products, and we help with advocacy and re-registration during the AIR programs. And as of 2017, I also do consumer products and cosmetics. I think one of the things people might have noticed is that I've not mentioned Nano at all in these first few slides, but Nano as a technology is relevant in all these sectors, and actually it comes under the umbrella of many of these sectors, depending on the nanotechnology or nanomaterial that you're producing. So within these sectors, of course, sometimes there are nanomaterials. Next slide, please. Like I say, we try and keep up to date, take pride in some of the memberships and affiliations that we have. You know, the nanotechnology is one of them, and it helps us keep abreast of some more of the regulatory movements that are happening, as well as, you know, what talks are being held between ECHA and other stakeholders when we're not able to attend ourselves. I'm part of the European Oilfield Specialty Chemicals Association as well, and there are many more. What this allows and some of us is it gives us an industry voice through these people, and also enables us to raise concerns with these industry associations, and come together as one industry voice, which Claire also does through the NIA. Next slide, please. So we try and keep as current as possible by attending conferences. Obviously, we exhibit at these conferences, but we also go and partake. We give talks, or we also go and listen, because that's the best way for us to learn about the new scientific advancements. We'll actually be chairing a session at CTAC Europe, which is an environmental conference about the scientific advancements towards risk assessments, their frameworks, and the implementation of alternative strategies to animal testing for nanomaterials. So it'd be great to see you there. We're also invited speakers as invited experts, and the most recent one was the NIA meeting that has just gone. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to say, these are some of the places where we've been involved. We've written articles for the Chemical Industry Journal on nanomaterials and other materials as well. I try to run a nanomaterials news page and keep that up to date as possible. And really just keeping as current as possible means that we're trying to ensure the longevity of the science that is within any registration that we do. Next slide, please. So the nanotechnology specific services, they don't differ all that much from the services that we provide, other than that we have to appreciate that they are a nanotechnology and they have inherent properties that make them, difficult to test or difficult to put through varying regulations. But we offer a complete project management and stewardship solutions. We offer registration of the technology in accordance with the relevant legislation. That's even when it's not specifically written in legislation, and how we do that is by keeping up to date with the science and the regulatory movements in either that regulation or similar ones to it within the EU. For instance, REACH is leading the way, so many of the regulatory applications there can be transferred across. We help with the substance identification in line with the relevant regulation, and this is important in REACH for pre-registration purposes, and also as you move down to getting more market access through being compliant with these regulations. So once we've ID'd the chemical, we go through a data gap analysis. We look at possible ways of filling the data gaps, such as conducting an analog search and looking at read-across feasibility, which is going to be highly important for the nanotechnology industry, particularly with the way that the annexes have been written under REACH, and particularly also looking at the registrations currently under REACH as well. We look at in silico profiling, so that is using computer-based models to define test methodologies and intelligent testing strategies to ensure a cost-effective navigation to fulfill your data requirements. We also do a literature search and appraisal of that as part of the data gap analysis using key quality criteria, which are set out by the relevant legislation, and also those that have been highlighted from European projects. And of course, along with that is appraisal of any existing company data. Once this data gap analysis is done, we move on to the development of intelligent testing strategies. Again, this is where the full read across would be done. The in silico or in vitro methods would be conducted, or we'd look at waivers, so exposure-based waivers, such as strictly controlled conditions, might minimize your data requirements under REACH, or property-based waivers. If you produced a nanomaterial in a gel, you could possibly waive the need to do inhalatory studies. Again, this just reduces costs and quickens the access to the market. Next slide, please. Once we've got a testing program in place, we would monitor that testing program, and this just is to try and achieve the highest quality and the longevity of the testing program that's conducted. For instance, dosimetry is an important thing for nanomaterials. Risk assessments are usually based on a mass, but actually sometimes the most relevant thing to base nanomaterial toxicology on is particle number or surface area, and we would ensure that all of those metrics, if possible, would be included, and we would seek out contract research organizations that were able to provide these services. So this sort of feeds in again to the longevity of your dossier. We then, once that's done, depending on what regulation and what tonnage you're producing, we'd move on to an environmental hazard and risk assessment, including classification and labeling under the relevant regulations. And again, this would be using up-to-date methodologies, the new exposure models for nanomaterials, or the new tiered refinements that may be needed, such as refined releases based on nanomaterial properties. We then complete the dossier and try again to ensure longevity. We can also produce expert reports, e.g. for such things as safety communications as well as SDSs. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a workflow of what might happen if someone comes to us. They'd come to us with nanomaterial X. They would say it was for as a process aid in refineries. So we would immediately identify, okay, which regulation are we working in? Okay, we're working in REACH. Great, we'd move on from that flow and say, okay, what's the tonnage that's being produced? Actually, we're producing under 1 ton. Okay, REACH doesn't apply for anything under 1 ton, but what we can do, if required, is put together literature and expert reports for customer communication, whether it be on efficacy or safety. If you do trigger over 1 ton, then we can start to look at the chemical ID, see if there's any suitable analogs, see if there's any nanoforms that it might fall under, and if it does, then we can purchase either a letter of access and move to a joint submission. And if within this joint submission your uses aren't covered, then again, chemical safety assessments would be conducted for that, and this would be a quicker way to access. So even when we're at this early step of chemical ID, we're thinking of the quickest way and the most cost-effective way of getting you market access within the EU. And if there isn't a similar chemical and you need to proceed to a lead registration, which I've put as LR, then we define what annex you're under and establish the regulatory requirements, bearing in mind now that nanomaterials, or more specifically nanoforms, are addressed within REACH specifically after the updates in 2018, and they will be in force in January 2019, and everyone is expected to comply with these legislative requirements. And then just basically what I was saying, we move into the DGA, the development of the ITS, move on to the risk assessment and the dossier and submission. And again, what we focus on is trying to achieve longevity and keep up with the science and the regulatory movements. Next slide, please. If we look at some of the non-commercial activities that we've been involved in as well, we really are, we're kind of in a novel place as a service provider because we're at the interface of the science, industry, and regulation. And it gives us a very much a holistic view, because what we've got to do is make the science work for industry and make the science applicable to the regulation and try and make these ends meet. So that all this information can be used together for one purpose. It enables us to provide a rational and unbiased view on some of the developments for the nanotechnology industry. Because of this, we've been involved as an external or internal project advisors for academia. We've also been able to provide expert comments and opinions on documents and guidance. And on the future of regulatory affairs and the current needs for nano. This also enables us, these non-commercial activities also enables us to make sure that any outputs from these things, there's practicability behind them and cost effectiveness, because as legislation gets updated, we wouldn't want an unnecessary financial strain on a business because there's far too many data requirements. Next slide, please. So what's changed about nanotechnology for us as a service provider? Well, the prevalence and awareness, obviously, in the last few years has certainly gone up. There's more nanomaterials now because there was more nanomaterials and more nanotechnology, more research, and there is now focus on it from a European Commission standpoint and also from a legislative standpoint. And this has triggered updates to REACH and also upcoming updates to the plant protection products legislation. At the moment, they're going through varying position papers, and then that will trigger an update. But again, they're looking at regulations such as REACH. Also, there is increased research activity, but primarily, well, there's been a lot at the moment going in towards governance because of this. Which I'm sure Claire can attest to, as she's involved with many of these governance programs and projects at the EU level. Interestingly now as well, previously what we were seeing with nanotechnology or nanomaterial submissions under REACH, for instance, is that they were submitted under the bulk form and there was minimal provision of data. And no use of specific guidelines. Now that this is being built into the regulation, now that we're seeing more standards, now that we're seeing more guidelines, this isn't any longer going to be the case. So for each, for example, we've seen the advent of nanoforms and nanoform sets, and a nanoform set is read across, but I would consider it read across, but within a joint submission. So you might say that my silver nanoform, I'm going to register under silver, and then you would have to prove that your nanoform goes within the other sets that are part of that silver submission, and prove that the hazard and fate properties are similar to that set. But the strategy is the same. You'd still have to pick out key bridging studies for this to highlight substance sameness. Companies will have to consider ITS for proving this and submitting when they wish to do it as a joint submission. More companies are now looking at waiving options or reducing their regulatory burdens by using such things as read across or strictly controlled conditions. These specific guidelines and data requirements has increased the demand for data, particularly on including more detailed chemical identification. Such things as functionalization of your nanomaterial, which was not explicit previously within the legislation, is now required, and it can still be confidential, but ECHA need to know exactly what that functionalization is and how it's done, which is similar to UVCVs. They want to know the processes behind that reaction mass. So like Neville said, it's important to make sure that these characterization things are cost effective. It's also a real business decision now on whether you want to proceed as a lead registrant or a joint registrant. You may want, as a nanoform, as a unique selling point, to separate yourself from the bulk for a particular property. Maybe you believe you're less toxic than the bulk form or the ionic form, and that your nanoform is more stable, and because of these unique properties, you feel like you don't fit within that joint registration. It also means that during evaluation processes, old waivers and old studies will probably need to be updated. Such tests as if you were doing a genotoxicity suite of in vitro tests, the Ames test isn't applicable. So now with that knowledge, if we had old tests within the Ames test on the bacterial strains for genotoxicity, that would no longer apply. Next slide, please. I've touched on this already. We now must consider more than one dose descriptor. There was previously a lack of tools, which meant that there was a heavy reliance on monitoring data for such things as exposure or exposure-based waiving. There are now more tools, which is great, such as Simple Box for Nano, which is an exposure tool for the environment. And there's more data coming through now from the European projects on release. We recently saw a talk that said that during sewage sludge treatment, sewage treatment plants, that only 5% of silver would actually be released into the aqueous phase, and the rest is actually sedimented out. It's flocculated. These tools lead to more reflective assessments, but also cheaper assessments. I mean, looking to monitor everything is very expensive, whereas if we build these tools, it becomes cheaper. Next slide, please. So some of the regulatory priorities, I think, we need to finalize the definition of the nanomaterial, and we're all trying to submit and make these nanomaterials, but no one knows what they truly are yet under the EU. And we are working with the old definition, and it is likely that it will be very similar. So we all roughly know what we're talking about. And we really need to focus on the consistent use of language and phraseology and give exact definitions, so there's no crosstalk, and so everyone knows what we mean. We need more specific guidance under the EU legislations with nano-specific criteria. The NIA actually worked very hard on this when new legislations are making guidance, and we're able to provide comments which then get fed back to people like ECHA. We certainly need more clarity within other regulations that have yet to adapt their legislative requirements or yet to address whether they need to. What we've found is, and what we've seen in the EU is there is a reluctance to deal with these. Now, nanomaterials are very complex because they are very reactive and they change, and how to deal with them, there are uncertainties. But these uncertainties are also seen in other chemicals like UVCVs. And if we don't build these into the legislation and people don't know how to test these, because of this uncertainty, they're reluctant to spend the money to try and be compliant. So, you know, it may put them off from building, you know, products within the EU or building an EU market. And that feeds directly into the testing guidelines. We do have some at the moment, but there certainly is a need for more. Because the last thing a company wants to do is spend hundreds of thousands of pounds doing a test and then finding out 3 or 4 years down the line that the test results no longer are applicable. We need to work on critical cutoff values. This feeds into the integrated testing strategies that I was talking about. So if we look at something like dissolution, it said if there's fast dissolution, then perhaps you would look at the ionic form of the substance and perhaps register under that. But at the moment, no one knows how to define fast dissolution or slow dissolution and where those cutoff points are. We need to work on the predictive models, and this is a key tool again for that ITS design. But also from an innovation perspective, we can look at a chemical from an innovation perspective, run these in silico models, and highlight where you may come into trouble, and highlight the tests that might be needed, and you can start to decide whether it's worth actually taking this product to market at a tonnage which is going to trigger legislative requirements. We need more accepted and validated tools, environmental and human exposure models, for instance. And something that I've touched on previously at the symposium at NIA was a unified use maps and compliance strategy to help ease market access for new and companies that want to create new nanomaterials. Interestingly, I think Claire's touched on it. There currently are 37 nanomaterials registered under REACH. But of these 37, 34 of them are within another chemical, which again goes back to the nanoform sets and the read across arguments to justify that. Now, previously, before this legislation came into place, the data requirements probably weren't as much, and you may now need more than one data set within your joint submissions when you're submitting within these joint submissions. But also the fact that there are only three nanomaterial lead registrations that are specifically just for the nanomaterial just highlights the importance of that and how people are getting market access for consideration. Next slide, please. So I guess as well, I just wanted to wrap up on why people came to us. Obviously, the legislations are all there. You can go and look at the testing guidelines. But people come to us for our expertise and the commitment to innovation. You know, people come to us if there is a lack of in-house expertise or budget to accommodate dedicated internal staff. And like Claire was saying at the beginning, to scale up a business, to have all these facets and have all these areas within the business, sometimes isn't immediately cost effective, so you can work on growing your business before having these particular branches, which may put too much of a financial strain on it. And sometimes just a second opinion, 2 heads are better than 1. Support to ease the load. Many of our clients will come to us, they have regulatory teams, but they just need help or they need another opinion. They come to us to ensure market access to the EU and or Asia now. This is as an only representative, or to look at the most cost-effective strategies and the quickest routes to market access. And to achieve compliance longevity, this is a key thing for the Nano. And like I've reiterated throughout this talk, is really keeping on top of the science and the regulation to make sure that something we produce now is still applicable in 5 or 10 years' time. and of course the management of consortia and projects and the money with that. And next slide, please. Yeah, that's me. Contact details are there. There's also links to our website if you want to find out more about what we do. Some of the research that I've produced you can find on ResearchGate, and some of the activities we're involved in you can find on our news page as well. So I will hand it back to you, Claire.
Thanks very much indeed, Kai. And that was another really interesting insight into the sort of niche in which services like this exist. And I was incredibly dismayed, of course, to hear that, of course, Brexit has a huge impact on all aspects of business. And where market demands change, then services will rush to fill that. And so you see Blue Frog now operating out of the Republic of Ireland, as you see with so many other previously British businesses. But it's also, what I took away from that presentation was very interesting, is that people need to be aware that service providers need to invest constantly in their own expertise. They have to be better than everybody else for you to pay them money to be a service provider. So it's a constant level in investment. And I guess the lucky thing with Blue Frog is that it doesn't have to invest in the significant infrastructure that an organisation like CPI also has to. And when you looked at the depth of knowledge and the breadth of services that Blue Frog provided, you realise that companies can't afford to get aspects like this wrong. They don't have enough time or money to either do it very slowly or to get it wrong and have to do it again. Especially small companies, you will only get one opportunity to get to market with your material, particularly if it's your core material, and it could be the difference between bankruptcy and success. And it also demonstrates that building efficiency, even if you have to pay an external organisation for it, building efficiency into your route to market through using an expert service provider makes you faster, which means you may be first to market with particularly interesting material. And that means you're entering the market first, which means you will have the highest price for your material, and you may be able to corner the market while other competitors are priced out as prices fall. So these are all things that mean that what can seem like a very expensive investment in an external, something that you think you may be able to do yourself, actually may mean that you are not the first on the market with that particular material, or you've missed the first wave of materials and you come in at a much lower price point. So these are all the things that companies need to factor in when they're building and budgeting a route to market. And my final point is that Kai talked about the regulatory priorities, and that while that seems a step away from talking about service provision, this directly impacts service provision, because without clarity, particularly a technical CRO can't offer an outcome with any confidence, and so they simply will not offer that outcome. So that shows how important the regulatory framework is, to have it precise enough so that you can accurately map your way through it, and organisations will invest in providing a service to support you do that. So on that note, I would like to say thank you very much to our speakers today for giving us an insight into the types of services that are typically provided into nanomaterials sector, and the levels of expertise and complexity that they bring in that small organisations in particular would never have themselves. So this will be recorded and available on YouTube. In fact, I'm going to stop the recording now, so I'll say goodbye to our YouTube audience.